Welcome to Advocacy Speaks. I am Dr. Tanya Glow Jones, and this Women's Series is a global conversation where leadership, lived experience, and transformation meet. And we're not just talking about advocacy. Oh no, we are exploring how we lead, how we protect ourselves and others, and how we create change that is both personal and powerful. And because safety is not just physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, and it's deeply connected to how we use our voice. Today, joining us is Nicole Snell, the CEO of Girl Fights Back, an internationally recognized expert in personal safety, empowerment, and violence prevention. Nicole's work has impacted countless individuals by helping them understand not just how to protect themselves, but how to trust themselves. Nicole, welcome to Advocacy Speaks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. I am thrilled to be here with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited, and I really just appreciate you being here. And as always, just having my six. And when the opportunity came that we could have this conversation, I thought, oh my gosh, you would be the perfect person. So if you don't mind, what I would like to do is quickly just kind of start off with your journey. And that way it'll give you an opportunity to share a little bit about what led you into this work, not just professionally, but personally. So if you don't mind, will you share that with us? What kind of led you to taking this walk?
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize until I had been doing this work for a while what really has been my driving force all of these years. So I experienced child sexual abuse, and because of what I experienced, I've always been very protective of other people and very much being able to protect yourself and boundaries and privacy. Even before we had that word boundaries, back when I was a kid, I didn't understand what that word was, but I understand what it meant to have a say over what happens to your body and how important that is. And so I feel like that just was my unconscious driving force as I, went to college and as I moved on into the world. I've always been active into sports. In fact, sports and being outdoors was an outlet for me from having to be at home. So I tried to be in my home as little as possible as I was growing up. And, I would go out and walk in the field around my house, which is why I'm very much connected to the outdoors and nature, why I feel so safe there. And, would join clubs and, like I said, was very athletic and doing things where I got to connect to my body. And when I connected to my body, I felt like I was tapped into my power. Even if I was just using my body to play volleyball or to play basketball or to run track, I just felt like that was how I was grounding into myself and my power. And years later, I ended up in TV production, right after college. I ended up in TV production, and I was dating a guy at the time where we were play wrestling in my apartment, and he pinned me to the ground and was laughing about it. In that moment, it was all fun and games. We were just playing. But there was that moment where I thought to myself, wow, what if this was real? What would I do? I don't know what I would do. And so that was my inclination to start seeking out a self-defense class. So I took a self-defense class and, found it was interesting and then didn't really think too much more of it, but had always been an advocate for others, always been an advocate for women. When I was in high school, I was part of a group called the Peer Leaders, where they trained students on how to have conversations with other students who were having, troubles or were struggling, that they didn't necessarily want to talk to a teacher or an adult. And so we would go and kind of, counsel them and try to help them. So, advocacy has been in my life since I was young, even before I even realized what it was. And as I've gotten even more into this work and into my career, I look back and I see all of these parallels of how I've been doing this and why I've been so passionate about it. And so I got into Girls Fight Back. It was a very long story short. I was in TV production, and if you want to learn anything about boundaries, be a line producer. Because I'm telling you, you have to deal with budgets and negotiations with vendors, and you're managing a crew and all different personalities. So it's a lot of practice saying no, and and navigating different situations. So, anyways, when I was in college, I was involved with this group that did domestic violence prevention trainings. And we primarily just did them, once or twice a year to our school or other local schools. And then what had ended up happening is the Department of Navy had found out about this group and wanted to hire them to contract them to do this work. And they reached out to me like 10 years later. Hey, Nicole, would you be interested in coming back and being a facilitator? And I said, I would love to, but I have a full-time job in TV production. I don't know that I would be able to do much, but I'll do what I can. And then it turned out that our entire department where I was working got laid off. And we were finishing a project that ended right when their contract began. And the timing was just perfect. And I said to myself, okay, well, I'll do this thing, right? I'll work with them. I'll see what it's like and what happens, and I'll give it a year. And if it doesn't seem like it's something that is a viable option for me, then I'll just go back to TV production. And so I started working with this group, was, learning how to do their program and their facilitation. And they had hired a company to handle all the contracting pieces of working with the government, because you and I know that there's a lot of paperwork when working with the government, and if you don't know how to do it, it is a lot on your plate. So they hired someone to help, and who they hired was the owner at the time of Girls Fight Back. And I remember when I went and I looked on their website and I saw what they were doing, and I thought, wow, I would love to teach self-defense to women in college. Right now I'm teaching domestic violence prevention and bystander intervention to military service members, but wow, it would be really great to work with college students too, in a different way, right? Teaching self-defense. And I emailed the owner and I asked for a job, and they didn't have a job available. And then 3 months later, they had an opening. And they called me back and said, we have an opening and we can train you to be a Girls Fight Back speaker. And so I got trained to be a speaker. I had to take and graduate from a full contact 20-hour self-defense course through another company that I'd never worked with before. Fell in love with their methodology, trauma informed, focusing on realistic scenario-based ways in which to protect yourself, not just, worst case scenario, not doing something that's going to take you years of training to learn. And I fell in love with that too. So there was a stretch there where I was doing all three things simultaneously. I was traveling with this organization who is training primarily military. And then I was training with Girls Fight Back and going to colleges and other organizations. We had opened up our catalog and started doing gender inclusive programming for Title IX. So we created a program called Students Fight Back, so all students could attend. And we started developing programming for corporations and things, because everybody needs this training. And then I was getting trained to be a full contact self-defense instructor. And then in 2019, the owner of Girls Fight Back decided to sell the company. And I asked her if I could buy the company, because I felt like I was so connected to the work that we were doing. I believed in it so much. I was so passionate about it and still am. I know there's other passionate people out there, but I felt like I was the one that could carry this forward. And she said yes. And so she sold me the company. And then 2020 happened and COVID hit. And, I'm still here to figure things out. But the Girls Fight Back company has actually been around since 2001. And it was founded by a woman named Erin in honor of her friend, Shannon McNamara. And so Shannon was murdered in her off-campus apartment in June of 2001. And because of how hard she fought for her life, there was enough physical and DNA evidence collected to arrest and prosecute her murderer. And so Erin started the company to honor Shannon's memory and her fighting spirit, and also as a promise to Shannon's mother, Cindy, that Shannon's memory would never be forgotten. And so I got to meet Erin when I became a speaker, and then Erin was very supportive when I bought the company. I've met Cindy. We have lunch whenever I'm in the Chicago area. She's very supportive of what I'm doing and how I've expanded the company beyond college. And now I have programs for the military. I do trainings for victim advocates and trainings on boundary setting. And, I've expanded the violence prevention practice to all these different areas that people might not necessarily have thought of, but in ways, like you said, like safety is more than physical. Safety is emotional. Safety is boundaries. Safety is consent. Safety is looking out for each other, and expanding that in a way that is practical for people to apply to their own lives so that they can walk through the world without limits.
Wow. Wow. That is so impressive. And, I'm sure when you started doing this work, because you were working with like three different companies, and one company had one thing they were doing, which was the facilitation, and another company is doing this, you know, contact, violent prevention with the boundaries and just self-defense kind of thing. So when you actually stepped into this space, what did you see that others were missing that actually made you decide that these were going to be the things that I'm putting together? So what was actually missing out there?
I would say it took me a few years of working with Girls Fight Back before I bought it, as we were trying to develop new programs and trying to really look at our curriculum, really look at our scripts, really look at the research. And I'm just going to tell you about how much of a nerd I am. I graduated summa cum laude from Cal State Long Beach. I am a classic overachiever, and I know that is a trauma response. I can understand and I can laugh about it because it's true. And so I am very much into the research. I love reading peer-reviewed journal articles and finding things that support, not just finding things that support, but seeing what's out there and seeing if what's out there actually supports the work that I'm doing. Because I don't want to do something if it's not supported by research. And so when I did more research and I was looking at this and I could see how empowerment-based self-defense, and that's what it's called in the research, how it is effective at preventing violence and how it is more than the physical. And then working with Impact and the founder of Impact, who had started this work on boundaries, and I was seeing how these could all fit together and how they could connect. And I saw what was missing was that this idea that that self-defense is always about physical and it's always about stranger danger. And the research does not support that because the most of the time, especially for women, we are assaulted by someone we know. And by looking at that, it's why would we put so many resources into something that is not where most of the violence is happening? It makes more sense to put the resources into where it is that can also be used in these other areas. So the skills that I teach can be used in those worst case scenarios, but they are designed for dealing with people that you know. And then it can be extrapolated over to other types of situations because when we're going out and walking through the world, I am not using my physical skills every day. I hope I never get to the point where I have to use them at all. I've never had to use my physical fighting skills. I've had to defend myself. We can talk about my Madrid, the attack I survived in Madrid later if we have time, but I didn't have to use my physical skills per se, right? And so understanding that there's so many other ways in which we can protect ourselves, things that don't require a list of do's and don'ts. And that's what I saw was missing was this trauma-informed connecting to what violence actually looks like and prevention strategies that are actually empowering versus restrictive and giving people skills and strategies that can help them actually go out and live instead of telling them they have to shrink their life or shrink their behavior or change who they are in order to be safe. Because I am not here for any of that. I've been on the receiving end of that type of safety advice my whole life. And I was definitely not going to be someone who is going to say the same things, especially when research doesn't support that those are actually the most effective ways for moving through the world safely.
I think many of us, when we think about fighting back, we think about the physical aspect of it, and we don't realize that there's so many other ways that you can fight back. So, how was your understanding of what fighting back actually looks like? How has that evolved over time for you?
Yeah, it has definitely evolved. When I bought the company, we used to give out pepper spray and things at events. And then I just was thinking about it, and after looking at the research and the work that I was doing, and I don't advocate for weapons. I'm not against them. I don't tell people what to do. I am very much an advocate for education, explaining to people what their options are so that they can make an informed decision. Not a decision based on marketing, not a decision based on fear, but decisions based on facts and research and that are supported as such. And so just little things like that, I stopped. I stopped offering those because I said, I don't even recommend people use them. And now I'm handing them out when Girl Fight Back is about empowering yourself, not outsourcing your safety, not externalizing your safety and putting it into something else or someone else. So that I felt like was a disconnect between my own values. And so I stopped doing that because I was like, this doesn't align with me, and instead focused on, educational piece. And so people ask me about things like that all the time. And I give them the facts and then allow them to make their own decision because that's what it's about, right? It's not about you doing what I tell you to do. It's about making sure you have all the information so you can make that kind of decision. And when it comes to boundaries, as I just continue to do more research and, work with different communities, and every time I do a presentation or a training, I am doing research on that community and I'm finding more things that I can include in it. And so my knowledge base just keeps expanding. I just keep learning more and more. And then I'm connecting the different pieces together. And oh, there's a connection here that I didn't see. And the boundaries connection and the link to public health is so powerful, right? Like I was at a training where I forget the name of the trainer that had said this, but she works with people with disabilities. And there was a quote there that said that boundaries has been shown to reduce exploitation and abuse in those types of communities, right? Just teaching people that they can say no, teaching people that they have a voice and can say that makes me uncomfortable, or feeling comfortable telling someone else if something happens. Just that knowledge and that autonomy to take that action can be preventative. It doesn't mean it's their responsibility to prevent violence, but it is empowering them with the autonomy to make a choice. Like we want to make sure we can give people the education, and what they do with it is up to them. But to deny somebody that information is, I think, a form of violence to prevent someone from learning something that could save their life. And so my perception of fighting back has changed. And I do think there's a portion of it that is physical, because not that we are using the physical all the time, but knowing that you can use your body if you needed to, and rewriting the gender stereotypes, especially for women that tell us we're weak or we're helpless or we're not strong enough, by rewriting those stereotypes and finding out how powerful your body actually is without having to be like quote unquote like gym strong. You don't have to bench press a certain amount or squat a certain amount to be strong. And knowing that you can use your body if you needed to can add to that confidence that you exude as you move through the world, which in itself is a preventative measure and is something that can reduce the chance of someone choosing you as a target. And that again is backed by research. It's just all these things that have come together that self-defense is so much more. And I spend so much of the time since I bought Girls Fight Back trying to really make that known, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of misconceptions and myths and misunderstandings about what it is. And sometimes that can prevent people from being able to have access to this. That in itself becomes a barrier. And so I have made it one of my missions to just educate as many people as possible. It's more than physical. When you're telling people to recognize red flags, that's self-defense. When you're empowering people to speak up in a meeting, if someone is speaking over you or interrupting you, using your voice is self-defense. It's more than just thinking about these worst case scenarios, which it applies in those too. However, every day we are not dealing, for most of us, every day we are not dealing with that worst case scenario.
Exactly. So when we think about self-defense, it's not just that physical protection, it's about safety and how we're actually being safe. So you shared that there were a few misconceptions. Can we talk about that a little bit more? Because I heard you say, the boundaries, and you talked about safety. So can you tell us a little bit more about what some of the biggest misconceptions are when it comes to self-defense and empowerment? And how those align with actually being safe.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest one is assuming that it's only about physical skills or that it's only about martial arts. Martial arts is a combat sport, and it absolutely is a form of self-defense, but it's not the only form of self-defense. Again, it's very focused on the physical part. And again, anything you do that makes you feel more confident and feel empowered, that's great. However, it's more than that, right? It's the verbal skills, it's the, situational awareness, it's intuition, it's setting boundaries, it's having the confidence to use your voice. It's trusting yourself to know when something feels off and to feel comfortable saying it. I would say another big misconception about self-defense that I would say is the biggest one that I am constantly trying to navigate around is the notion that self-defense is victim blaming, that the sheer fact that someone has learned this skill or is taught this skill, that means that we're blaming them for their experiences, or we're blaming them for violence, or we're telling them, well, now it's your responsibility to protect yourself from violence. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And I know a lot of this stems from the past, when there have been a lot of misconceptions over the years that have carried forward, like through the advocacy world. I know there are challenges in the legal system with how self-defense is defined. I know all of these things, and yet it's still so important to try to share with people that self-defense isn't telling you what you should have done. Empowerment-based self-defense does not tell you what you should have done. The sheer knowledge or the education of self-defense isn't victim blaming. People victim blame, and people can use anything to victim blame somebody. And victim blaming is absolutely wrong. However, to say that by learning skills that the research shows can be effective at protecting yourself or dealing with a situation by just having that skill is victim blaming, or teaching that skill is victim blaming, is very reductive, and it prevents women from learning skills that could potentially save them. And it's not saying they should. And the distinction is, if someone shares with you that they have been assaulted and somebody says, well, you should have done XYZ, whatever, that you should have locked your door, you should have not dressed like that, you should have not drink that. All those things are victim blaming. If they say, oh, you should have fought back, that's victim blaming. If they said, oh, you should have taken a self-defense class, that's victim blaming, because that person is using different ways in which to delegitimize what somebody's true experience was. However, if a survivor says, I want to feel more empowered and I am afraid that something might happen in the future, which a lot of survivors come to my classes with that. And I say, okay, well, here are some options for you. Have you thought about learning this? It's about the future. A trauma-informed self-defense practitioner, violence prevention practitioner, will be using the knowledge to help empower somebody in the present, to help them regain control, their self-efficacy, their confidence, and to help them for the future. It's not about saying, well, you should have used it in the past, because anytime you do that, then that's problematic. And I think that's where the distinction really needs to be.
Wow. Wow. And I appreciate you sharing that, because again, ultimately you're talking not just about physical protection, but you're talking about safety. So if there's a way that you could define what real safety for women are today, or I heard you talk about boundaries, I heard you talk about education and communication and just being able to speak and talk about it. So what would be one way that you could define real safety for women today?
I would say it's hard to just name one, but I would say building up the confidence to make decisions and choices that work for you, and having strategies available to deal with different situations you may face. Right? It's like if you take a road trip. I do a lot of road trips. I do a lot of solo traveling. And something I do before a road trip is I check the car. I usually take it to the mechanic and just check make sure everything's in good running order, check the air in my tires. I bring, a little tire inflator and a jump starter and extra water and things just in case something happens, right? We hope that nothing happens, but I'm going to have all of these things available, and I'm going to know how to change my tire. I'm going to know that I have AAA that I can call if I need to. So I have things in place. But imagine if we said to somebody, oh, well, you don't get to learn any of those skills. You don't get to have access to a mechanic. You don't get to have access to any of these tools for your car that might be able to help you. You just have to go out and hope somebody would be out there to help you if you run into trouble. That would be very disempowering. We would look at that and we would say, how dare you? How dare you prevent someone from learning something or having access to gain more education and more information? And so I think that is really what safety is. And imagine if we lived in a world where violence has been completely eradicated, right? We live in a world in which violence exists. I don't think there has been a time in human history when there has not been violence. I am not an anthropologist. I have not looked at every culture that's ever existed, but I feel like that's safe to say that there really hasn't been a time in human history when there has been zero violence. And so with that being said, we have to acknowledge and be realistic that this is the world that we're living in, where someone is sexually assaulted every 68 seconds, right? Imagine if we could make that zero. Imagine if today there was no more interpersonal violence, zero. Would we still need tools for safety? Would we still need to learn how to set boundaries? Are there still people that may be trying to scam you? Are there still going to be conflicts at work? Are there still going to be people that, might make you feel uncomfortable as you're walking down the street, whether or not, they do something, but just those things, we're still going to need that. And so until perpetration is zero, even as we're working to make that a reality, and I know all of us are working towards that goal. Everyone who is in this space is working towards that goal. We need everybody Safety is not either or. It's not, well, we do this or we do that. It's no, we need every person working in every possible avenue as a multidisciplinary team to create this world that we want to see, in which we don't have to worry about interpersonal violence, where we can walk down the street and not have to worry about things like that. However, even if we lived in that world where that existed, there would still be environmental factors. People would still be driving cars. We would still need to look both ways before we cross the street. We would still need to have our situational awareness, right? There's still animals out there. So, right, these skills are things that are it's a human right. It's a human right to have access to being able to navigate your own environment freely and independently without feeling like you always have to rely on someone else to protect you or to save you. Yes, if someone can help you, great, but there might not always be somebody there. There might not always be somebody that knows what you need. Right? There's so many people that aren't comfortable setting boundaries for themselves. How are they going to set boundaries for someone else or stand up for somebody else? So it's like we have to start with ourselves first, and then by doing that, then we get into where we are really affecting community safety, where people are more confident speaking up for other people because they know what it's like to speak up for themselves. They're more apt to be able to recognize situations where they say, that looks like that person might need some assistance. That's going to help them recognize those types of situations.
Listening to you, and it's really making me think about the next thing that I want to talk to you about because, historically, like you said, there's no society in which violence doesn't exist. It's here. And for all too often, a lot of the times we've worked in a very reactive way to violence. But what we're really talking about here is prevention and how do we get in front of it? So the first thing is like, what do you think is currently falling short when it comes to prevention efforts?
You know, I think there's so many, there's money. I would say money is a huge issue, right? People are not getting grants funding to provide the amount of trainings and programmings that could really be beneficial if we could make sure that it was in every organization, every school. You know, I would say knowledge and understanding of what the problem is. There's still a lot of misconceptions about what the problem is. A lot of people still think it's stranger danger when we know those of us in the advocacy world know that it's not, but there's still so much of that messaging that is centered around that. So there's just still needs to be more education out there. And I think cognitive dissonance is a real thing. That it really does prevent people from seeing past, their own what they've been taught and what they feel like is the way things should be. And I feel like we need more open-mindedness to look at alternative ways to address the problem, or really leaning into the research and seeing what people have said and expanding it out. And again, understanding that it's not a zero-sum game. This isn't like I said, an either or. We need everybody. It's not, you need to stop doing that because we should be doing this instead. It's like, no, how about we do all of this. We do all of these pieces and keep working together. So I feel like that connectedness is what's missing. There tends to be, not everyone is willing to collaborate with each other in different spaces in which you're working in. And that can be a challenge. We're all on the same highway going in the same direction. It's
We're
like
now
if we just yeah, it's like if we could just keep going this way, we could really, there's enough of us that we could really make change, and we are, right? We are making change. It's just the educational piece and the access piece, which again comes down to money, and a lot of that is tied into politics. And it just continues to be these walls that just keep getting thrown up for us to try to navigate around.
absolutely. Oh, I think about proactive prevention, and what I hear you saying is that it really is about collaboration in order for us to be in front of these things. What do they say? Collaboration is the new currency. Just
Yes.
working together, sharing information, continuing the conversation, moving forward, and not just reacting to things, but really getting in front of them and wanting to see change. And so
Yes.
I definitely appreciate that. So let's go back and tap in a little bit to the boundaries. You were talking about that a little bit earlier. And this is where I want to lean into something deeper because I think about voice and I think about boundaries. And I heard you say both a little bit earlier, using your voice. So, why is boundary setting still such a challenge for so many women, even highly accomplished women?
I will say that I feel like the problem is because of how we are socialized and how we continue to be socialized from the time we're very little, that women are supposed to be quiet. We're supposed to just go along. We're not supposed to make waves. We're not supposed to be too loud. We're not supposed to interrupt. All those things are not feminine and it's not ladylike. And there's all these terms that are pushed on us that really just diminish us, diminish our power, diminish our voice. We spoke up and then we were admonished or we were punished or we received social backlash to that. And then in order to fit in a social group, we learned, oh, that's not the way that we're supposed to respond. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing is helping women to move past that. A lot of the women that I end up teaching, they resonate really strongly with what I'm teaching and the way in which I teach it, because it is about empowerment. It's not about telling anyone, again, it's not about what you should have done in the past, or blaming anyone for anything that happened, because it is never anyone's fault for violence. It's about acknowledging where we've come and what we are experiencing right now, and how can we shift past that? How can we shift past that mindset that says that we can't speak up, that says that we can't use our voice? And I'll give you an example. I was doing a training. It was at a conference, and I do this exercise where we talk about getting out of uncomfortable physical contact with people we know, handshakes, hugs, things like that you might see, in an office area. And this woman we did if someone doesn't want a hug, we can offer a handshake. And she raised her hand and she said, actually, I don't like handshakes. I actually prefer hugs. And everyone, turned and looked at her, because most people would say, oh, I don't want a hug. I want a handshake if you want something less intimate. But for her, a handshake was more intimate. And she explained, and everyone, we just listened and we took it in. At the end, she came up to talk to me afterwards. And I didn't remember that she was the same woman who said she didn't want to shake hands. And I went to shake her hand and she goes, oh, no, I don't shake hands. I go, oh, okay, no problem. And then her face, she just looked at me with surprise and she says, that was the first time I ever said that to somebody. And she was just it just filled her with just this joy and this confidence that she had finally told somebody in the moment that she didn't want a handshake. She had been given that permission. I didn't give her that permission. She always had that. I just helped her tap into that piece of her that told her that no, she gets to decide what to do with her body. And then of course I modeled, respecting it. And so she got to have a good interaction where she set the boundary and someone respected the boundary. So it's all very positive, right? It becomes a very positive memory for her. But it's just those moments. And I have people that come up to me all the time after attending one of my training sessions on boundaries, where they say, I still remember how to get out of that hug. And I did this with someone at my church, or I did this with my neighbor. And it just really resonates, because it's what a solution is if you can't verbalize the problem. So I'm helping people verbalize the problem and understand the problem. And then we can work through what are solutions, what are some things we can do to address that. And it is a lot of times, like I said, undoing what we've been taught all this time of what
Yeah.
our place is.
I think that that is so important, with, recognizing those boundaries and also identifying when those boundaries are being compromised. I remember I was talking to a family member not too long ago, and we were talking about the boundaries for young people. And, a lot of times when you think about young people, it's like maybe it's a toddler or a 3 or 4 or 5 year old, and grandma comes in and it's like, oh, well, go give grandma a hug. And the young person says, no, I don't want to give grandma a hug. And, the adult says, you better get over there and go give grandma a hug, right? And then, what we're doing is we're telling that young person that they don't have any autonomy over their body, right? And that if someone else, maybe a stranger or maybe another family member that wants to touch that child inappropriately, we've already conditioned them that anyone has rights over their body, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. So I think that sometimes people don't even recognize what some of those early indicators are when safety or boundaries are being compromised. So can you give maybe some just an example of some early indicators of what someone's safety or boundaries being compromised could look like, so that way when we see it, we can recognize it?
I would say trusting your intuition is the most important indicator, right? It's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be dependent on the situation, and everybody's intuition is different because our intuition is keyed to how we've grown up and all the experiences we've had and how our brain has processed and how our neurons have connected based on everything we've experienced in our lives. And that's not to say that you would have the same intuition. A teddy bear doesn't mean anything to somebody. Someone sees a teddy bear sitting on the counter and they're like, oh, it's a teddy bear. But to the person that survived that, they know that that teddy bear is a threat because of how the abuser has used it, or, so that you're going to respond differently because you now can recognize what threat is. And that ability to recognize it is still self-defense. Right? Survivors of domestic violence are actively using self-defense, even though it's not necessarily called that. They're still doing actions to minimize their risk and to make safety plans in the moment in a way to minimize the risks to their safety. And they're doing them all the time without necessarily them being called self-defense, right? So I would say tapping into your intuition is key. If something makes you feel uncomfortable, that's for you to be valid in setting a boundary. It doesn't have to be something that's a threat to your safety. It doesn't have to be something where, someone has said something overt. It just has to be something that your intuition has sparked and you say, I really don't like this. I feel uncomfortable. For you to be able to set a boundary. And it might be as simple as creating some space between you and the person, or telling the person, it makes me uncomfortable when you use that nickname with me, or, whatever it is. It doesn't mean it has to be a big conversation or a big confrontation. It often doesn't have to be any of those things, but it's just connecting to that voice inside of you that says, hey, something doesn't quite feel right, and trusting in that. And that is your indicator. And we've a lot of times, women especially, have been taught that we can't trust ourselves. We've been taught that our intuition means that we're being hyper vigilant, or that we're making things up. We've been gaslit to not even believe our own body.
Yeah.
And so reconnecting to that piece, I would say, is the most important thing. Trust yourself.
Yeah, trusting yourself is so important. And I think also using your voice. Many times we've heard this saying that no is a whole sentence, right? And I'm constantly talking to people about telling them to own your no.
Yeah.
Definitely something I try to tap into consistently. So, do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I believe the No is a Complete Sentence is from the book The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. I'm pretty sure he's the first one that said that. I could be wrong, but yes, that phrase is in our zeitgeist now, and it's so important. Yes, no is a complete sentence. Anything you say after no is a negotiation, and we do not have to negotiate our boundaries with anybody. And so owning your no is means that you don't have to explain yourself, right? You define your boundaries. You define who has access to your space, to your body, to your energy, to your time. No one else gets to determine that but you. And so owning your no means that if you do not want someone in your space, when it comes to, like, obviously, if we're talking about a work situation, your boss asks you to do something, you're not just going to say no. Different context, right? But
Right, right.
in a situation where we're talking about our personal or professional boundaries, you can just say no. And that means you do not have to give an explanation, and let there be awkward silence. You can say no. And then as they're waiting for an explanation, you can just make eye contact or continue what you're doing. And if someone asks you what, it's just no, the answer is just no. You don't, your no is valid without you having to give someone an explanation. Your no is valid whether or not someone understands the reason for your no. Your no is not contingent on someone else accepting that you said no, right? Your no means no, this does not make me comfortable right now, and I don't have to sacrifice that for this. And it might hurt someone's feelings. Yes, it might. And that tends to be something for a lot of people, especially for women, but I've had this with men as well when I've been teaching, that this fear of offending somebody. This fear of someone not thinking that you're a good person, this fear of someone thinking that you're rude or mean is a very powerful motivator for people to compromise their boundaries because they feel like, well, it's socially acceptable. I don't want to be seen as difficult, and what I tend to try to teach people is that whether or not you decide to set a boundary is still your choice. Like, own that autonomy. If you are looking at a situation and yes, something's making you uncomfortable, but you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm looking at all the pros and cons of this, and it might make things worse for me if I do set this boundary in this moment. So I'm going to wait. That's still a conscious choice. You haven't let yourself down. You haven't failed. You have looked at the information and you have made a conscious decision that is best for you in the moment. So own that. That is still self-efficacy. That is still making a choice. And I want people to know that it's okay if someone is upset by your boundary. We cannot control other people. And I
Absolutely.
think that ties into, self-defense and the idea of, why are we teaching self-defense and not teaching perpetrators not to perpetrate? Well, perpetrators know what they're doing is wrong. I think that we have consistently made it clear that perpetration is wrong and we have laws against it. We have policies against it, right? So we can't control what somebody does. That's out of our control. But what I can control is me and my response. And so I don't want to be at the mercy of what someone else may choose to do or not do. Choose to do or not do is not my responsibility to control, but I want to have strategies in place for me to be able to safely respond if I am faced with something that is uncomfortable, like setting a boundary with a boss or with a family member at the holidays, or dealing with something that is dangerous, right? These skills are transferable. And again, it's not just about the worst case. It's that humans are human, right? We can't read each other's minds. And regardless of whether something is a violent situation or not, there might be misunderstandings, there might be miscommunication, and learning how to navigate that from a place of power, from a place of, I know what I'm feeling and I can speak up, I can use my voice, I can try to address this in a way that keeps me safe, mentally safe from burnout, mentally safe from not being afraid of going into a situation and feeling like, well, there's nothing I can do to deal with it if something happens, but instead saying, oh, if such and such happens, here are the skill sets that I could pull from if I needed to. That is where empowerment comes from. And that is what I am focused on teaching people, is that it's not just about these in the moment responses. It's about changing how we interact with people around the world, how we deal with everyone in our everyday lives. Isn't it reasonable to assume that if we're teaching women these skills that changes how they interact with the world, that is challenging these gender norms and these gender expectations? And we know that a lot of gender expectations are the roots of interpersonal violence. Isn't it reasonable to assume that by changing how we are interacting with the world and how other people are seeing us and how we are confidently moving through the world, that is changing how people see gender expectations and is ultimately a form of primary violence prevention, because we are changing those misunderstandings of what gender roles are, what they should be, reframing our empowerment. And if people are interacting with us and we are empowered with these skills, and now they're interacting with people who are saying no, are setting boundaries, who are feeling confident speaking up for themselves if someone has made them feel uncomfortable, things like that, then that's going to change how those people are going to interact with other people, because then they're going to say, oh, wait, I did this and someone shut me down. Okay, maybe I do it again and someone else is going to shut me down. And imagine they keep running into people who shut them down. Ultimately, that's going to change their behavior, right? Neurobiologically, behavior is equal to perceptions, thoughts, emotions, memories. That's by Dr. Michael E. Hopper. He said that. So behavior is equal to perceptions, thoughts, emotions, memories. You change one of those things
Mhm.
and you can change someone's behavior.
Wow. Wow. And at the end of the day, that's what so many people are just trying to do. And a lot of times too, when we think about boundaries, we're always there's this perception or thought process that we're doing it for the other person, but really and truthfully, it's never for the other person. It's always for us. It's always to protect us, because people are going to always push past those boundaries. And that's what they do. Like you said, perpetrators are going to always be perpetrators. So we can't really focus on that. All we can do is focus on what we can change. And what we can change is how we respond to things, or how we don't respond to things, because no is a whole sentence.
Yes, yes. And we there hasn't been a lot of research on programs that are focused on perpetration yet. There hasn't been a lot of research showing whether they're effective or not. It doesn't mean we stop doing them. We got to keep working. Eventually, someone's going to find something that works. And we need to keep doing that aspect of it too, right? And that's great. I firmly believe that it takes all of us working in all these different spaces to create this change. And again, even if we found a program, imagine if we found a program that showed that it was reducing perpetration by 50%. 50%. Would that preclude our need to learn how to protect ourselves and learn how to navigate the world? No, because there would still be perpetration out there, right? We don't know what 50% learned it or not. But isn't that interesting that right away, as soon as I said that, right, we were locked in together, right? If we could reduce perpetration by 50%, that's huge. What if I told you that self-defense, empowerment-based self-defense training can reduce sexual assault by 50%?
We would
That's
still
in the
need it.
research. Yeah. I mean, that's a fact right now, or evidence supported, right? That's what research has shown, which is why it baffles me of why it's not included in more trainings, which is why I'm trying to get it into more places, because here we have a methodology that can reduce violence by up to 50%. That's massive. I don't know of any other prevention model that has that rate of success. It doesn't mean we only need this. We need everything else too, but this is so valuable. And not only is it valuable for prevention, it's valuable for healing. There's a study called Taking Charge, and I can share the details of citing the source for you afterwards as well. But it was done with female veterans who were survivors of military sexual trauma. And this was, they were all in like their 30s and 40s, years after they had experienced their trauma. And they were put through an empowerment-based self-defense class. I forget the exact details of the study. I want to say it was several weeks long. And they did, the before measurements of mental health, and then they did, after, and then followed up 6 months and so later. They saw the incidence of PTSD drop significantly. Hypervigilance dropped. Ability to discern safe from unsafe situations dropped. The reluctance to go out and meet new people dropped. They felt more safe and comfortable and confident being able to go out into the world and interact in a social nature because they felt like they could handle a situation if it arose. Not that it's their responsibility to prevent someone from doing something. That's not our onus. Our onus is just on being educated with things that could help us if we ever needed them, right? It's just simply about having access to that knowledge and being encouraged to learn, as much as we can.
Wow. So if there are women that are listening right now and they want to feel more empowered, what are 3 immediate things you think that they could start doing today to increase their personal safety?
Trust your intuition. Full stop. Trust it. It is there for a reason. Your brain is designed to protect you. Your brain is for survival. Your intuition is there to help keep you safe. So trust that feeling if you ever have that weird gut feeling or however it presents to you. Trust that feeling. That would be number 1. I would say number 2 is knowing that you're worth fighting for, just acknowledging it. And remember, fighting isn't just physical. It's not just saying I'm worth physically defending, because you are. But fighting back also means advocating for yourself, going into your doctor and your doctor's not listening to you, feeling confident, having the voice to say, no, I'm having these symptoms. I want more tests, or I want a referral to somebody else, right? Advocating for your health, for your body in that type of situation. Advocating for yourself with your partner, with your children, with your parents, just knowing that you're worth it, that you have value, you have inherent value. Your value isn't based on, your title or what you do for other people. You wake up in the morning and you are inherently valuable and you are inherently worth fighting for. And then I would say the third thing is to take up space. And that in itself, I feel like can be huge, because a lot of times women, we've been taught to shrink, right? Don't talk too loud. Don't walk with your shoulders back too far. Don't look too confident. You don't want anyone else to be intimidated by your presence, by your space. And I'm going to say, no, walk into that room shining as bright as the sun, shoulders back, head up. You own it. You don't have to shrink yourself. right? You don't have to shrink yourself with your voice or any of those things. Just stand tall, shoulders back, head up, and say what you need to say. And know that you deserve to be here. You deserve to be here. You are worthy. And your intuition is such a valuable safety mechanism.
I really love the take up space because as an individual that experienced both childhood and adult harm, and domestic violence, I know what it feels like to have your shine dimmed. And when I came out of that space, it's almost like you're in the fishing bowl, so to speak, and then when you come out of it, you realize how bad it really was. And and what I appreciate about me now is owning and taking up space and never being in a space where I will allow anyone to dim my shine. And so it's like you said, you got to walk into that room with your head held high and your shoulders back and just own the fact that you're there and you're supposed to be there. So I really love that taking up space. I'm gonna have to use that, take up space. I love it. I love it. I love it. Now,
It's part of
so
self-defense. It's part of
absolutely,
it.
absolutely. So what do you think some organizations and leaders should be doing differently right now when it comes to safety and prevention? What can we do differently?
Gosh, that's such a hard question because there's so many different types of organizations. I would say listening to survivors first of all, right? There's a lot of harm that might be happening that if people would just listen to survivors and adjudicate justice for them to get perpetrators that are often repeat perpetrators out of where they can continue to commit harm, that would be huge, right? Dealing with the perpetrators that we know that have already caused harm, right? Let's make sure justice is being served for those people. I think that would be huge. Listening to survivors, creating an environment where survivors can speak up, creating an environment where even thinking about committing harm to somebody is just the last thing you would think of, right? Not only because it's morally wrong, but they also know the organization's not going to tolerate it, you know? I think, that and that starts from the top, creating an environment where people feel safe and supported and able to communicate those things, I think are very important. I think making sure there's a variety of different trainings available to folks, right? Unfortunately, perpetrators don't wear a big red sign on their head. It would be great if they did, if it said perpetrator and you're like, great, I'm going to keep an eye out for that person. But we don't. And they often hide and they mask, sometimes for years. And a perpetrator isn't a perpetrator all the time, right? They may perpetrate and then later on they're volunteering at a food bank or, helping somebody, it's a challenge to see, to know that we don't always know. And so we can't guarantee that, and this is the issue I feel like with trying to focus on perpetrator focused behavior, because how do you get the perpetrators in the room? How do you get the people that need it in the room? And then if you're just trying to get everybody in the room, that's great. Just get everybody in the room. And hopefully, we're getting through to some folks, but we're not going to get through to everybody, which means we're still going to need to learn how to deal with those who aren't taking the training to heart and, revising their actions and their behavior, right? Crime is an active choice. It is an active behavior that they're doing. So I would say making sure there's a lot of different trainings available. Yeah, have some training that focuses on, like consent. I think Tony Porter and A Call to Men is great. Not that he focuses on perpetrators, but he does a lot of work, redefining masculinity and giving, positive examples for masculinity, which I feel like is part of it, right? The gender roles and stuff that contribute to interpersonal violence. So I think organizations that are doing that work is amazing. I think we need that. I think we need to continue to put money into survivor support and healing, because a lot of people are experiencing violence and don't have the support that they need to make a new start, right? Violence is costly. It's costly for somebody to restart their life and to, have to move away or to, experience homelessness in the it's there are all these different pieces that need to be addressed. And then I would say making sure there's a lot of different prevention style trainings available, trainings like on boundaries, on, empowerment focused self-defense, on trainings that focus on all the different aspects of it, right? Starting from in children and, talking about, recognizing harm and different types of harm. What does human trafficking look like? What does stalking look like? Like, it's hard to prevent something if we can't put a name to it, if we don't have the language to describe what's happening. I didn't have the language to describe what was happening to me growing up. All I saw was on TV, and what happened to me wasn't exactly what happened on TV. So of course I didn't think that I was a survivor of, of sexual abuse. And when I did finally tell somebody, they didn't believe me. And I didn't know that I could tell somebody else because we didn't learn about any of this in school. All they told you about was like, oh, if someone does this, if a stranger gives you candy, you tell, your teacher. Okay, well, it wasn't a stranger giving me candy. So if we don't know what the harm is, how can we describe it? How can we then get help? So
Yeah.
making sure that we are, educating in all of these areas because that I feel like we just need that comprehensive approach.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I mean, and those are all such true statements. So I appreciate you for sharing that. As we look forward into the future, where do you actually see the future of women's safety and advocacy going, especially with everything that's happening around the world right now?
Oh, well, what do I want? Is this where I get to imagine a world that I hope we can create?
Yeah, I think that that's the better question. What do we want to see in the next, you know,
I want a world where women can exist in society without being catcalled or harassed or bothered. And if they are, then people respect, know, and walk away. I imagine a world where girls are not married off to adult men. I imagine a world in which human trafficking demand is non-existent and there is no more human trafficking. I envision a world in which girls can get the menstrual products they need and not have to worry about assault when they're going out to the bathrooms where they are. I know that's a problem in many countries around the world. I imagine where girls can get the education, just general education, the same education that's afforded to everybody. I envision a world where women can exist as the fully autonomous human beings we are, with full and complete control over our bodies, our decisions, and our choices, like any other human being on the planet. That's what I envision. That's what I want. Will I see it in my lifetime? I mean, realistically, probably not. But is that going to stop me from fighting for it? Absolutely not. I will fight until my last breath for this world that I know can exist. It can exist because violence isn't inevitable.
For violence to come to a complete end, could be completely eradicated and to literally put us out of business. That is
Yes.
hope. But until then, we'll continue to fight, we'll continue to move forward, we'll continue to use our voices, and we'll continue to educate on what we can do in the meanwhile to work towards dismantling these harmful behaviors. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. As we think about the Glow series conversations that we've been having, everything that we talk about is a part of our Glow framework. Right? And so this conversation I feel that we've been having today is about the O in Glow, which is own your own story. So let me ask you this. What does it truly mean for a woman to own her story? And how does it translate into owning her story, her voice, her boundaries, and ultimately her safety?
I would say owning your story is acknowledging that anything that you have survived in your past is part of you, but it's not all of you. It doesn't define all the parts of who you are. And owning the story is acknowledging that that is part of the mosaic that makes you you, and that you have the choice in how you move forward and what choices you decide to make, and that we have the autonomy to decide our future, to decide what our story is, to decide what job we'll take, what conversations we want to have, how we want to show up in the world, and that it might be different on different days. And that's okay for us to navigate the world based on how our mental health is on any particular day. So I would say owning your story is all of that, and including to listen to societal stereotypes and voices that may try to keep us down and keep us small and try to define our story for us, and instead standing in our own power and shouting it from the rooftops what our story is, and not letting anyone manipulate it for their own gain or for their own uh
Let me ask you this. What would you say to the woman that was listening right now that may feel unsure, that may feel unheard, that may feel like her voice doesn't matter? If you could tell her one thing, what would it be?
I would say to her that it's not your fault, that a lot of times what who we are and who we are shaped to be have been shaped by our surroundings and things we've been taught. And we when we learn more, we have access to making different choices because we've now given ourselves access to more information. Information is so powerful, education is so powerful. So whatever has happened in the past is now in the past. And now you have more information about what it means to own your voice and what it means to set boundaries. And so you can go forward now into the future because now everything past this moment in time is now the future. And then you can decide in your next future interaction how you want to have that interaction. And it might take a few times, and that's okay, right? We're all works in progress. I'm not perfect at boundaries all the time. Are you kidding me? Nobody is, right? It's not about perfection. It's about knowing that you can make these choices. It's about being able to have that thought process afterwards and say, oh man, maybe I should have done, or maybe I could have done it this way, or maybe I would have wanted to say this, right? That's when we start having those conversations. It gets easier the more we do it. And when we start having those conversations, that's when we know our perspective is shifting. So I would say take a deep breath and know that, and this is going to sound so cliche, but your future starts today. Really, your future choices start today. So maybe the next interaction you have where maybe you felt like you didn't have a voice, maybe in that moment, maybe say something, maybe just say one sentence that someone maybe wasn't expecting you to say, but you say, actually I had a different thought on that. And see how that feels when you acknowledge that you do have that power to speak up, and then know that it builds, it builds, it builds. Confidence is not found on the top of some mountain. It is going to change. You're going to be really easy to be confident on one day and really hard on some days. It's part of the journey. It's not a place you're going to get to. It's a lifelong journey, and it's okay to flow with it like water. You just flow with it.
Just flow with it, just like water. And I like that you said that it's a lifelong journey. And that's what growth is, right? We're growing every single day. The goal is that while we're growing, we're also still continuing to move forward. And even if I couldn't say no today, or even if I couldn't, use my voice today, it doesn't mean that I can't do it tomorrow. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your voice, your leadership, and the work that you continue to do to empower women across the world. I want to say that I truly do appreciate you. This conversation really reminds me that safety is not just about protection. It is about ownership, it is about awareness, and it's about the courage to stand in your truth. You've stood in your truth on your journey with Girls Fight Back and all of the work that you're doing. And again, I just want to say I appreciate you and I salute you. So thank you so much for that. Here at Interactive Advocacy, we believe that change doesn't happen by chance. It really happens through voice, action, and leadership. And I just want to say thank you again and thank all of you for being a part of this conversation. Have a wonderful one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones.